Miyamoto Musashi and Sasaki Kojiro were two samurai about to have the duel of the century. Musashi wasn't your typical samurai. He was the type of person who thrived on chaos and slept like a baby after destroying someone's honor. An absolute mad lad, you could say. Kojiro, on the other hand, was a fan favorite. Charismatic, competent, and the type of dude who would win best hair in the samurai yearbook. For years, the two would circle each other like roosters in a barnyard until they decided, let's just do this, and a fight was scheduled for April 13th, 1612. The venue? Ganryu-jima, a remote island. Obvious choice for a dramatic sword fight. So Kojiro arrived bright and early, glittering sword in hand, ready to fight like a professional. And Musashi was late by many hours. My man left Kojiro pacing up and down, thinking, is this guy really ghosting me? But then, he got there. And he didn't arrive with a conventional katana, as anyone reasonable would. Nah, that wouldn't be iconic enough. He walked up with a wooden sword that he'd carved out of an oar during his boat journey over. You gotta appreciate the sheer boldness. Kojiro, who was understandably irritated, used his nodachi, his extra-long sword. They got into position and the fight began. As soon as it started, Kojiro went straight for his famous move, the swallow cut, which was so quick and perfect that it was almost like a myth among samurai. But Musashi pretty much said, nice try, little bro, and easily dodged it. And before Kojiro could recover, Musashi swung his wooden sword, and delivered a single crushing hit to his skull. Game over. Kojiro, the living legend, had fallen. And Musashi didn't just win the duel, he destroyed Kojiro's entire reputation. It was like rolling up to a basketball game with a beach ball and dunking on LeBron. But wait, there's more. Musashi wasn't the kind of guy to wait around for uncomfortable post-duel talks, so he immediately returned to his boat and began rowing away like a man with a plan. Kojiro's admirers, yeah, he had groupies, samurai stands were apparently a thing, were enraged and went after Musashi, but they couldn't catch him. And that, my friends, is how Miyamoto Musashi established his legacy as not just a brilliant swordsman, but the ultimate troll. Next up, we got a fight between elephants. In 1593, there was a king named Narejuin, who woke up and, like many leaders of his time, figured that talking things out was not the best way to do things. Why discuss issues when you can resolve conflicts with a duel on top of war elephants? Theoretically, of course. That morning, as the sun came up over his camp, Narejuin probably stretched, yawned, and wondered, what should I do today? Breakfast? Nah. Writing history with the tears of my enemies? Definitely. He chose violence, as people often did during medieval times. Back then, Thailand, known as Ayutthaya, and Burma were like neighbors who just couldn't stop arguing over their boundaries. King Narejuin, a source of pride for Thailand, was more than just a king, he was a remarkable figure of the medieval era. Smart planner? Check. Strong fighter? Check. Owner of the greatest war elephants? Correct. Coolest king ever, not gonna lie. At the same time, his rival, Crown Prince Mingyi Swa of Burma, was relaxing under a tree in the battlefield. He wasn't really being lazy, it was more of a smart, let's avoid getting trampled by elephants right now kind of pause. But Narejuin had a bit of a different perspective. When he saw Swa looking a bit too comfortable, he snapped. What's this guy up to, he probably said to himself. Going on a holiday during a war? And amid the confusion, he then yelled with the confidence of someone who has never given up. Hey brother, why are you sitting under that tree, as if you were afraid of the sun? Why don't you step out here and face me one-on-one like a true man? And let's take a moment to think about Mingyi Swa's situation. There he was, just trying to get through the day without any trouble, when out of nowhere, the king of Thailand pointed him out in front of everyone. Peer pressure is a real thing, and back in medieval times, refusing a challenge like that was pretty much the end of your social life. So instead of taking the smart route, which would have been to run away, Swa got on his elephant, mumbled something like, this is either going to make me famous or kill me. And then they got ready to duel. On one side, there was Narejuin, shining with a strong presence. Meanwhile, Mingyi Swa is likely thinking about why he didn't take a sick day that day. The battle was a mess, but everyone paused to see the fight on elephant back, because who could resist? And honestly, the fight itself was pretty anticlimactic. Narejuin, with the skill of someone who'd done this many times before, took down Mingyi Swa in one smooth strike. According to legend, the strike was so strong that It not only finished the battle, but also crushed Burmese hopes of taking control of Ayutthaya forever. Mingi Swa, that unfortunate fellow, really had no opportunity. One moment he was a prince with dreams, and the next he became a warning about why you shouldn't go against King Narejuan. The battle ended with the Burmese army pulling back and Narejuan standing happy, probably surveying the scene to say, who's next? But nobody was brave enough to step forwards, because how can you outdo an elephant duel? Anyway, moving on. Okay, we're going to talk about Jean de Carouge versus Jacques Legris. Now, Jean wasn't your typical knight. He was the type of man who got up every morning and decided, today I will fight someone. And Jacques, on the other hand, was his frenemy turned arch nemesis, because medieval conflicts had no chill. The beef? Well, it was personal. Jean accused Jacques of assaulting his wife Marguerite, which was not only a severe allegation, but also one which might completely cook his life. But rather than relying on evidence or boring old court processes, Jean went full Game of Thrones mode and demanded a trial by battle. Because clearly, beating up someone in front of a crowd is the most effective method to demonstrate your wife's honor. A big audience gathered. Everyone's fired up because they were attending a legit medieval UFC match. The French monarch himself showed up, observing from the VIP area. The stakes were, if Jean lost, Marguerite would be burned at the stake for false accusations. Which is just crazy. So, no pressure. The conflict itself was utter medieval lunacy. This was more than just a brief sword fight. Nah, these two fought with the complete medieval armory. I'm talking lances, battle axes, swords, and daggers. Yup. First, they charged each other with lances, because of course they did. Why not start big? And when that didn't work, they switched to war axes, smashing and clanging like two people competing in the blacksmith Olympics. Then came the swords, sparks flew, the crowd cheered, and neither man backed down. Jacques, despite being the accused, battled as if his life depended on it, because, well, it kinda did. And Jean battled even harder, motivated by fury, honor, and probably fear of his wife's approaching death. They eventually ended up tumbling on the ground, fighting like two enraged toddlers who discovered that there was just one cookie left. And the great finale, Jean, in an action movie style move, gained the upper hand and stabbed Jacques to death. The audience went friggin' bananas. Jean emerged triumphant, bruised but undamaged. But Jacques suffered the ultimate defeat, one that would forever mark him as a monster in the history books. Marguerite's name was cleared, and Jean was awarded the Husband of the Year award, Medieval Edition. She became a living legend, with her dignity restored and her story remembered as one of the most dramatic events in French history. Jacques, on the other hand, didn't have a happy ending. Only a cemetery and a lot of side-eye from history's writers. So yeah, that was an absolutely insane duel. Andrew Jackson versus Charles Dickinson. Let's go back in time to 1806. A simpler time, when the best way to settle a dispute was not through Twitter drama or a courtroom, but by a traditional gun duel. And no one represented the I don't have time for your nonsense intensity more than Andrew Jackson. You might remember him as the 7th President of the United States. But before that, he was a hot-headed guy with a strong sense of honor, a questionable temper, and not at all chill about insulting his wife. Our story begins with Charles Dickinson, who clearly lacked self-preservation instincts. After some drama over a wager, since betting on horses was the thing to do back then, Dickinson decided to insult Andrew Jackson's wife, Rachel. Big mistake. If there's one thing you didn't do in the 19th century, it was to stir up conflict among someone's family members. But Dickinson went there, and Jackson was not going to let it slip. Jackson challenged Dickinson to a duel, because that was clearly how mature people settled disputes in 1806. Pistols at dawn? Yes, please. The duel was scheduled for May 30th, 1806, in a peaceful field in Kentucky. Jackson arrived with his trademark intensity, like he'd already decided that death was an option for him that day. Dickinson, secure in his shooting abilities, was eager to conclude things soon. Spoiler, that may not be exactly what happened. So here's how everything went down. The duel started and Dickinson shot first, and boy did he deliver. His gunshot hit Jackson square in the chest. Most people would consider that the end of the story. But Andrew Jackson was not most people. The man just stood there, bleeding, like being shot was just an inconvenience. Jackson clutched his chest and glared at Dickinson. That's all you got? Now it was Jackson's turn. He lifted his revolver and took aim calmly, like he wasn't already bleeding out. But here's the thing, Jackson wasn't exactly famed for his accuracy. In reality, the gun had a history of misfiring, which is the very last thing you want in a duel. But not that day. That day, fate was on his side. He fired and the bullet hit Dickinson, it was game over for Charles. Dickinson died from his injuries, but what about Jackson? Well, he walked or limped away a winner, carrying the bullet in his chest for the rest of his days. Later in life, when he became president, many people reflected on this event. He wasn't just a politician, he was a man who took a bullet, murdered his opponent, and then went about his business like it was any other Tuesday. Let's go to France. February 1870. A cold winter in Paris, ideal for casual chats at a cafe, warm coats, and apparently duels over art remarks. Yup, this is the story of Edouard Monet, a painter known for his dramatic style, and Edmond Duranty, a critic who discovered that some artists struggle to accept negative reviews. Monet, who was the central figure, was more than just a painter. He was an artist, the type who probably gazed at a sunset and thought, I could do better. He was confident, skilled, and, as it happens, somewhat sensitive to criticism. Duranty, in contrast, was a writer and critic who boldly published a review that was not very positive about Monet's work. It wasn't really a strong roast, just a mild so-so opinion. But for Monet, it felt like a personal attack. So what did Monet do? Did he write a blistering response? Create a work of art that gently pokes fun at Duranty? Nope. He hit him. Precisely. Monet faced Duranty in a cafe, slapped him across the face, and just said, how dare you? But it didn't end there. No. In a classic style of resolving conflicts, Monet responded to the slap with a formal challenge to a duel. The duel happened in a forest because, clearly, swords and trees create a great Instagram vibe. Imagine the scene. The morning fog rolling in, the soft chirping of birds, and two men in elegant coats getting ready to duel over art. Now let's discuss the swords. This wasn't an exciting, adventurous event with big movements and elaborate steps. Nah, this was just one clash of swords, but what an incredible clash it turned out to be. The swords hit with such force that they really bent. Yeah, those two were either very strong or just a bit too dramatic. In any case, the noise of their blades clashing rang through the trees like a scene from a badly crafted historical play. In the end, Duranty cut himself, but it can't even be called a cut. More like a scratch, to be honest. Monet, upon seeing blood, said good enough and decided to wrap things up for the day. Honor is back, the duel's ended, and surprisingly, everyone's alive. It was the least exciting duel ever. But here's the great part. After all this fuss, Monet and Duranty became friends again. Of course they did. This is French drama we're discussing, where every disagreement wraps up with wine and making up. 1792. Enter Lady Almeria Braddock, a woman with diva energy who would throw fists, or guns, or swords, over the slightest shade. And this other woman named Mrs. Elphinstone made the fatal blunder one tragic day when she casually guessed Lady Almeria's age. Implying that Lady Almeria looked a day older than 25? Nah, buddy, you were being challenged to a duel. Lady Almeria wasn't going to let this go. She snapped her fan shut, eyes burning red, and declared pistols at dawn. And Mrs. Elphinstone, not anticipating her afternoon tea would end in a fight to the death, reluctantly accepted. Because what option did she have? It was either show up for the duel or be eternally remembered as the woman who gave in to a questionably middle-aged noblewoman. Round 1 started with handguns. Mrs. Elphinstone, probably thinking, let's get this over with, fired her shot. It grazed Lady Almeria's hat, destroying her perfect hair, and, more importantly, her entire morning. But here's the problem about Lady Almeria. This wasn't just about winning. This was about making a point, and firearms wouldn't cut it. So, of course, they ditched the guns and took out the swords. Now, sword fights aren't quick. They're filled with banging metal, clumsy footwork, and plenty of spectacular near misses. Lady Almeria, on the other hand, was here to win, not for theatrics. With a single swift push, she struck Mrs. Elphinstone's arm. Not a fatal wound, just enough to show her who's boss. Miss Elphinstone, now bleeding and wondering why she had ever opened her big mouth in the first place, admitted defeat. And then, a bit later, she drafted a formal letter of apology to Lady Almeria, who probably read it with a smug smirk while drinking her tea. And just like that, the duel was finished. Ah, the 12th century, a time when feudal lords didn't have Netflix or video games, so they had to create their own ways to have fun. And by fun, I mean battling for small pieces of land like their lives were on the line. Hugh Bygod and Roger Mortimer, two lords from the medieval times, entered the scene, and simultaneously declared, I want that, while gazing at the landscape. Of course, this resulted in a duel, because in medieval times when someone took your land, you didn't call a lawyer. You picked up a sword and said, meet me on the battlefield, my friend. Hugh Bygod, the central figure in our story, was more than just an ordinary person with a title. Nah, Bygod was the type of person who woke up every day wondering, how can I make this kingdom focus on me? He was full of ambition and determination, and it seemed he also had a significant grudge against Roger Mortimer, his opponent in the turf battle. Mortimer was likely just trying to protect his family's land, but Hugh saw it as a great chance to show off his power. Let's set the stage. In the English countryside, two lords came together with their knights, banners, and very shiny armor. And what are they fighting over? A small piece of dirt that they both claimed was totally mine. And then it started. The two lords began to duel by charging at each other with lances, as was the custom in medieval times. The goal was to unseat your opponent from their horse. Hugh was rigid. He approached Mortimer like he was trying out for the title of most fearsome knight of the century. Mortimer was just standing still at the start, but then he started to charge when he saw that the other dude was really serious. The fight became really intense, and the lances broke into pieces like firewood. Then the battle moved on to swords. It was time for some action, and Hugh Bygod, oh, he really knew how to use a sword. He swung it like someone who had nothing to lose and everything to win. And Mortimer, on the other hand, maybe began to think that this entire land dispute wasn't worth the trouble. Hugh's attacks were constant, his hits precise, and his desire to win unmatched. And in the end, Roger Mortimer had to accept his loss, which in medieval times likely meant he had to let go of his sword and grumbled something like, alright, fine, take it, and walked away from the fight. Hugh Bygod, feeling victorious, stood there confidently, saying, yep, that's right, this land belongs to me now. Who's up next? And our dear Mr. Mortimer, he returned home to nurse his wounds, maybe reconsider his life choices, and write frustrated letters to anyone who persuaded him that this duel was a smart move. Now, if you want to hear about some really weird cults, click this video over here. Also, hey, subscribe.